Well, hi there. Hello again. It's Jeffrey Johnson coming to you here from Johnson Land at Westlake High School, classroom 408. I am here ready to attack Act 2 of Hamlet. I hope you are ready to attack it as well. Whether this is your first reading of Act 2 or whether this is a review for you for having been here in class when we covered it, I hope this is not a wasted 15 minutes or so of your life as we just get about halfway through what is Act 2 today. Act 2 is in fact the shortest act in Hamlet, but really Acts 1 and 2 together kind of really set up the story going forward with a lot of things, so it's really worth our time. We're starting on page 29 with Act 2, Scene 1. I highly recommend the first thing you do before we even start to read is maybe at the top of that page where Act 2 is beginning, write something like this: a few weeks have passed, or a few weeks later, or something like that. In between Act 1 and Act 2, we don't know exactly how long has passed, but we know some time has passed because there'll be talk of the way Hamlet's been behaving lately, and there'll be a conversation he has with Ophelia which indicates some things, some passage of time. The first thing really to mark in this scene is the first two lines where Polonius is talking to Rinaldo and says, "Give him this money and these notes, Rinaldo, I will, my lord," says Rinaldo. All that's happening here is we know Laertes is now in France. He went back to where he had been before the story began. And Polonius is sending someone called Rinaldo. He's a minor character, but apparently he works for the king, works for the castle. In fact, then kind of works for Polonius. As Polonius is sending him to deliver letters to his son and to bring him some money while he is off in France, having a good time. The quote here, spoken by Polonius, that you already have pre-marked is, "Before you visit him to inquire of his behavior for testing purposes," just know the speaker, this is Polonius speaking, but one thing we see is that Rinaldo, before he actually makes contact with Laertes over in France, he's going to investigate his behavior. He's going to see if he's been behaving himself, which is a little shady because Laertes, of course, is a grown man, but as under the premise that Polonius wants to, make sure that he's not going to stay in the family name or something. On the next page, I highly encourage you mark the fourth and fifth line on the page where Polonius says, "I, drinking, fencing, swearing, quarreling, drabbing, you may go so far." What's being implied here is he is giving, it's not being implied, it's being stated, he is giving Rinaldo the permission to make up some things about Laertes and see if the people he's talking to agree with him. Hey, before you talk to Laertes, see who he's hanging out with, and they'll go talk to those people and then suggest that some things about him. Oh, Laertes, he sure does do a lot of drinking. And see if his friends, the people he's been spending time around, agree. Oh, yeah, he sure does drink a lot. Or if they say, "Oh, no, I've never seen him hardly take a drink," then you'll know the truth to be able to report back to me. You can also say he's been doing lots of fencing, like he's doing, fighting for money with his sword. Lots of swearing, foul language and stuff like that. Quarreling, getting into bar fights. Drabbing, which is, as you see from your footnotes, another word for whoring. Has been whoring around town, going to like brothels and things. Any of these basically lies, things that you can say about him. If these other people agree with you, you will know what Laertes has been up to. And if they disagree and say, "No, he doesn't do that," you can report that back as well, and we can know the truth. You have a quote marked over on page 31. "See you now, your bait of falsehood takes this carp of truth." And that's for that particular line, just know the speaker is Polonius speaking, but that's just kind of reemphasizing what we were just talking about. It's okay to tell some lies about him because we're trying to get to the truth. The ends justifies the means. You can do this. It's okay. This is kind of shady coming from someone that just in the previous act was telling his son, be a man of character, be an honorable man. This above all to thine own self be true. But being kind of shady, being kind of hypocritical is not really a problem for Polonius. All right, so Rinaldo is off, and he will deliver money and letters to Laertes. At the bottom of page 31, I highly suggest you mark the last four lines and then the first couple of lines on page 32, which will take us right into a quote. Last four lines on 31, first two lines on 32. What's happening here is that Ophelia comes into her father in just a real state of distress because of an encounter that she just had with Hamlet. If you remember from the end of Act 1, Scene 3, Polonius forbade his daughter from ever speaking to Hamlet again. Don't speak to him. Your relationship is over. She didn't even get a chance to talk to him, break up with him, anything like that. And here, a couple of weeks later, Hamlet has recently gone into her chamber, gone into her bedroom, basically, and had this encounter with her, and it's completely freaked her out. This is the first time that she's seen him in this time. And now she comes to she runs to her father after that encounter's over and tells him this. Last 4 lines on page 31, my lord, as I was sewing in my closet, which is their word for bedroom, really. Lord Hamlet, with his doublet all embraced, no hat upon his head, his stockings fouled and gartered down jived to his ankle, pale as his shirt, his knees knocking each other, and with a look so piteous in purport, as if he had been loosed out of hell to speak of horrors, he comes before me. That quote kind of goes with all those lines. Really just know the speaker for that, for your tests and whatnot. Ophelia basically is describing Hamlet comes in, his cloak is kind of undone, his socks are kind of down around his ankles. He looks just really, really unkempt. We know from the end of Act 1 that Hamlet was going to be feigning madness or faking his own insanity, basically. And he's done that by going into her. And he literally is described by her as having been kind of released out of hell. He looks like he's possessed. I highly encourage you mark the entire 14-line passage on page 32, spoken by Ophelia, beginning with, he took me by the wrist. Mark all 14 of those lines. She describes here, and it's interesting that Shakespeare chose to use this as one character is describing it to the other instead of seeing it performed on stage. You will see this when movies are done and whatnot. In fact, the movie that we're going to use to study this play, you actually see this scene act out. But in the actual play, it's just her telling her father about it. All 14 lines are important. First, what happens, he took me by the wrist, held me hard, and goes to the length of all his arm. And with the other hand thus over his brow, he falls to such perusal of my face as he would draw it. He basically, Hamlet walked into her room, grabbed her wrist, stared at her, and just stared at her face long enough as if he was trying to memorize it and draw it later. Just grabbing her, doesn't say a word to her. Long stayed he so, at last, a little shaking of mine arm, and thrice his head, thus waving up and down, he raised a sigh so piteous and profound as it had seemed to shatter all his bulk and end his being. Still, Hamlet just stood there, held her, stared at her, like he's memorizing her face, shakes his head up and down thrice, shakes his head up and down 3 times, and then just lets out a tremendous sigh. You know what a sigh is, just like a deep breath. He lets out this huge deep breath as if all his being just went out of him, as if just all the life that he had in him went out of him. Finally, he let her go. That done, he lets me go. With his head over his shoulder turned, he seemed to find his way without his eyes, for out of the doors he went without their helps. To the last bended their light on me. Basically what he did at that point is he finally lets go, but then when he walks out the room, he never takes his eyes off of her. He just continues to stare at her. In fact, with his head over his shoulder like this. Just stares at her all the way out of the room. So Hamlet, in an attempt to further kind of show that he's in a state of madness, he's in a dark state, he's in a deep state of something, goes into in essence, his ex-girlfriend's room. He has not talked to her in weeks. She's made no attempt to contact him or anything because she was forbidden to. He has not talked to her. And when he comes in this room, he still does not talk to her. He grabs her, stares at her, lets out this huge deep breath, leaves the room without taking his eyes off of her. It is possible, in fact, maybe probable, that the reason he did that to her, even though this is hurtful to her, it really upsets her and whatnot, is that he knows that she'll do exactly what she's doing in the scene, that she will run and tell her father what just happened, knowing that her father is very close to Claudius, and he'll tell Claudius about this. The purpose of this, if he's trying to kind of mess with Claudius, if he's trying to buy himself some time or whatever, this is pretty effective. But it's also pretty cruel to do this to someone that you care about, it seems. At the bottom of page 32, about the 8th line from the bottom, it's the last line in a little speech by Polonius. I would start with, what have you given? Start right there and mark a total of 5 lines, this conversation between father and daughter. What? Have you given any me hard words of late? No, my good lord, but as you did command, I did repel his letters and denied his access to me. That hath made him mad, says Polonius. Have you been harsh with him? Have you talked to him? No, I've done exactly what you said. I denied all access. He's had no contact with me until this moment. And when Polonius says that hath made him mad, we see that Polonius believes Hamlet is in a state of madness because of, and I would maybe jot this down at the bottom of page 32, Polonius thinks Hamlet is in madness because of rejection or disappointed love or heartbreak. You can kind of word that however you want for your own notes. It's interesting to look at this point of the story, some of the main characters. What do they think about Hamlet's condition? Why do they think he's in whatever state he's in? Polonius seems to think that it's a broken heart. In fact, that maybe he was even a part of that by breaking up Ophelia and Hamlet. Very important scene, and it's the last really part there of scene 1. Looking at scene 2, let's just get a little bit into it over on page 33. You have some lines marked at the bottom of the page, the last 4 lines in a speech spoken by Claudius to, this is the first time we see these two in the play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Rosie and Gildy are 2 of Hamlet's friends from childhood. They've been, as you'll see in this scene, kind of summoned to come to the castle by the king and the queen to talk to them. And in fact, here's what Claudius wants from them. He tells these 2 gentlemen to, your quote there, to draw them into pleasures, to gather so much from an occasion as you may glean whether aught to us unknown afflicts him, that open lies within our remedy. That is English, but it's very Shakespearean English. Basically what it means is hang out with Hamlet, find out, get him to relax and have a good time so you can kind of gather, maybe he'll talk to you. You can glean from him what's afflicting him. You can figure out what is causing him pain, what's upsetting him. So I can provide the remedy so that I can help him. That's a 4-line quote. For the purpose of the test, really just know the speaker. It is Claudius, and that he's speaking to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. But it's useful to know what it means. He's asking these guys basically to spy. Will you come all the way to the castle here, come and work for us, basically. And what we want you to do is go hang out with your childhood friend. These 2 guys are Hamlet's friends from grade school, but he probably hasn't seen them in like a long time. And now he's been asked to go hang out with him, get him relaxed. Maybe he'll tell you, maybe you figure out what's really upsetting him. Over on page 34, you see you have a quote there that you pre-highlighted, where the queen says, your visitations shall receive such thanks as fits a king's remembrance. For the purposes of testing, just know the speaker of those lines, your visitation shall receive such thanks. King's remembrance is a reference here to money. Basically, the queen tells them they'll be well paid to do this, spying, basically, on Hamlet. So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are basically agreeing to spy on their friend for money. They've been hired to spy on him. If you go to the bottom of the page, 4 lines up from the bottom, I would mark 2 lines where Polonius says, as it hath used to do, that I have found the very cause of Hamlet's lunacy. Polonius rushes into the room to tell Hamlet's parents, his mother and stepfather, his uncle dad, I know what's put Hamlet into madness, and this is something that they're very anxious to hear. In fact, the king says, oh, that do I long to hear. Over on page 35, you have a pre-marked quote, I doubt it is no other but the main, his father's death, and our hasty marriage. That is spoken by Gertrude. It says in your book, spoken by the queen. Just to really know the speaker of that for testing purposes. But I would also maybe in my notes, if I were you, somewhere over top of page 35, you have a little room. Gertrude thinks maybe these 2 reasons are the reason Hamlet's in madness. He's grieving, it's grief over his father's death, and they married very quickly. His father's death, their quick marriage. Those 2 reasons is why she thinks it's obvious why he is in a state that he's in. He's still grieving over the loss of his father, and and it's interesting, these 2 characters don't, at least at this point of the play, haven't really spoken openly about the fact they did get married very quickly, but it's just kind of mentioned here in passing. We married very quickly, and that seems to have put him off. I would, if I were you, go down to Voltimand speaking on page 35, the 3rd line of his little speech. I would mark a total of 10 lines. This is useful. It's a lot of information, but it's very useful. Starting with his nephew's levies, mark all the way down to the line that says, to give the assay of arms. You're starting with his nephew's levies, and you'll go all the way down to the line that says, to give the assay of arms against your majesty. While I'm doing that, if I were you, I would also mark the last 3 lines on that page, that it might please your quiet pass through your dominions for this enterprise. what's happening here? You're marking a bunch of lines. I would, off to the side, put something like this. Fortinbras promises to never attack Denmark as long as he gets free passage through Denmark to attack. And you see this country mentioned here in those lines you just marked, to attack Poland. Fortinbras promises to not attack Denmark as long as he gets passage through Denmark to attack Poland. This is basically a response in Act 1. Claudius was assuring the people he had the situation under control. He's sending messengers to Norway to deal with Fortinbras. They did inform the king, which was young Fortinbras' uncle, that he was making all these threats to come and get his father's land back. And basically, he was called in by the king, by the Uncle King, similar situation we have in Denmark and Uncle King, and made promise to not attack them. We have agreements with them, and he says he won't attack as long as he gets passage through Poland. Keep that in mind. That won't be important till later in the play, but it will be important. Now, last couple of things here for this particular video. We're almost as far as we need to be in good standing to finish this thing, finish this act soon. On page 36, here the king and the queen are very anxious to hear all that Polonius has to say. He's come in and promised them. He's found the cause of Hamlet's lunacy. So he begins to speak, and he just colors his language with so much. He just loves the sound of his own voice, wants to feel important. In this case, maybe part of being an elderly person. He just talks, seems to be repeating himself a lot. Finally, she says a famous quote, "More matter, less art. Polonius, will you please shut the heck up and get to the point about what you came to tell us?" You know, like shut up and get to the point, basically. And then he says, "Madam, I swear I use no art at all. No, I'm not coloring my language. I really have something to say." And then he still continues to blah, 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 before he actually gets to the point to mention at the bottom of page 36 that Hamlet and Ophelia have been seeing each other. And that the point he's trying to make is that they're having broken up, or her refusing him at this point, is what's kind of sent Hamlet over the edge. To justify this opinion, he takes out a letter that he went and took from her, which is a letter Hamlet had written to her. Remember earlier in the play, she had made reference to, he's made many tenders of his affection to me. He's said things and he's done things to show that he cares about me. One thing it seems he's been doing is writing her love letters. Polonius then pulls out one of those love letters and reads it to Hamlet's parents, in essence, just to show that he really was in love with her, and the fact that she stopped talking to him is what kind of sent him over the edge. So over on page 37, if you can just, I would go like the 11th line from the bottom, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the 8th line from the bottom, and mark a total of 11 lines. It's the last 8 lines on 37. It's the first 3 lines on 38. These are useful lines as Polonius is describing what's happened to Hamlet recently. Lord Hamlet's prince out of thy star. I told her this must not be. Prescripts gave her. She'd lock herself from his resort, admit no messengers, receive no tokens. Which done, she took the fruits of my advice, and he, repulsed a short tale to make, became sad. He fell into a sadness, went into a fast. He kind of stopped eating, into a watch, into a weakness, into a lightness, and in this declension, and the madness wherein now he raves for all we mourn for. This is interesting because if Hamlet really over the last couple of weeks is trying to convince people that he's in madness, he's done a pretty effective job of it, because those watching him see that he got kind of depressed. Of course, depression wasn't really a concept at that time. That's why it's so easy for these people to believe that someone would slip into madness. Psychology wasn't even, behavioral science wasn't even a thing then. But Hamlet's gotten in a really dark state. He stopped eating. He's not really sleeping. And now he just seems to be in this state. It's very believable that he is in madness. The last thing you need to mark here as we finish this video is right in the middle of page 38. There's 6 lines beginning with, "You know sometimes." 6 lines spoken by Polonius is where it starts. "You know sometimes he walks 4 hours together here in the lobby. So he does indeed," says the queen. "At such time I'll loose my daughter to him, but you and I behind an arras then mark the encounter." Polonius suggests, as Hamlet, one of the things he's been doing is walking around the lobby, reading, just going and walking around. I'm not really talking to anyone, is what you're going to see. Next time we see him doing that, I'll send my daughter out to him. We'll hang out behind the arras, which is just a big honking curtain. We'll eavesdrop. We'll listen to the whole conversation. Basically, we'll spy on him. And that's going to be the plan Polonius and Claudius plan to do, to spy on Hamlet. That, my friends, is enough. It's a good place to stop right there. In the next video, we will finish Act 2 by finishing the rest of this scene. Thanks very much for watching and for reading and for listening. I hope it's been useful to you. Okay, bye.